Hello. So I gave my cousin some sourdough starter. So this is just a little introduction of what to do once your sourdough starter is very active. In my case, you can see my sourdough is spilling all over the counter. I have salt ready to go, and I have flour. So what I typically do is I will take the sourdough starter. So let's just angle it over here so you can see. So I take the sourdough starter and I pour off a good chunk of what's nice and bubbly so I can get a bread started. Okay. I take 2 cups of water, add that into the flour, into the sourdough starter. And then I take a nice healthy 1 teaspoon scoop of salt and add that in. Now you can use a dough mixer or you can just use a fork. I typically just use a fork. So that's all I'd use. Mix the salt, sourdough starter, and the water together. And then add the flour. And what I typically do, I don't measure it. I just want to make sure I've got a nice pile of flour sticking up out of the water. So I would at least start with 2 cups of flour to start and mix that in. You can kind of see as I mixed it in, it incorporates the flour into the water. And it should become fairly hard to mix to the point where it kind of sets up and you have like a dough ball. And if it's still very liquidy, then you'd probably want to add more flour, because you can do a high hydration sourdough bread, but it's very difficult to handle. So I always find it's easier to have your dough be a lot drier, because then you can just handle it with your hands once you're done mixing it. And it's a lot easier to shape into your bread dough when you're ready to put it into a banneton for letting it rise. When I put the dough into a banneton, I let it rise overnight, and then I'll bake the bread the next day. You can put the dough into the banneton and leave it on the counter and try to make bread that day, but then you're kind of stuck waiting for the whole rising process to happen in the same day. And one of the steps you have to do after you get the dough incorporated, you already have to wait for it to rise on the counter before you put it in the banneton in the first place. So I've pretty well got the dough mixed together so there's not much flour left. So you can kind of see it's fairly dry in here. There's a little bit of like a dust residue from the flour in there. So what I do is I take it over to the sink and I wet my hand, and I just use my hand to fold the dough on top of itself. So now you can see I got the dough pretty well turned over. And it's nice, and it's got a little bit of wetness on the outside of the dough. So you don't want to have the flour be too dry, because the goal is you're going to let this sit on the counter with I typically use a pot lid on it. So I want to keep it nice and moist. So you put the lid on so that it doesn't lose too much moisture. So I will just make sure to put a little extra water in there. And then clean your hands off. Okay, so then lid on top. That's typically going to sit on the counter for at least, I would say, 4 hours. But what you're really looking for is you got an idea. You can't even really see the dough at the moment. So it's more than 4 inches down from the top. So when it's risen, it should be about halfway towards the top of the bowl. And then it'll be ready to put in the banneton. So this is the banneton. All it is it's a bowl for letting the dough rise. You can get away with just using a regular bowl in your kitchen, but if you do use a regular bowl, you're probably going to need to use one of the kitchen towels, and you're going to need to flour the kitchen towel so that the dough doesn't stick to it when it rises.
Wait, I have a strategy.
Alright, I'm going to end this video, and then I'll post a sequel whenever I get the second stage done and it's ready for putting into the banneton.